Here on BBC1, Nick Ross with another look at how people's lives have been affected by crime.
In Crime Limited tonight, how a former MP turned to fraud and inflicted misery on his victims. The Victorian murder trial which led to the right to speak out in your own defence. And Healing the Wounds, the doctor who works with children who can't bring themselves to think about the dreadful things they've seen. Hello, we start this evening with a cautionary tale. How not to be deceived even when the prospect of riches and a better life are dangled before us. That, of course, is the lure used time and again by con men. The next case is a celebrated one because the fraudster turned out to be a leading public figure, though perhaps celebrated is not a word his victims would use for him. As in all our reconstructions, actors play the main characters.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Are you in the financial world at all?
Well, sort of. I work for a newspaper.
Oh, really? That's very interesting. I'm in finance myself. John Ryman.
Pauline Chalker.
Yes. I'm a barrister, but I also deal on the stock market.
I may have been a bit more forthcoming than usual because I think I had some sort of drinks party at the office, but he was amusing. I mean, he certainly isn't dull. And the journey passed a bit quicker than usual. I mean, we might have been at Swindon and say when I thought we were at Reading or something. He's an entertaining sort of person.
Well, thank you for enlivening my journey, Pauline. Been a pleasure talking to you.
He rang me at the office and suggested a drink or something. I didn't think too much of it. I mean, I didn't think it mattered much one way or the other. I mean, at my age, I should be allowed to have sort of friends, shouldn't I? I was impressed by him because he had a very strong personality, which was very domineering, and he seemed to know what he was talking about.
You really shouldn't leave your savings languishing in that miserable little building society, Pauline. You know, I'm involved in this Swiss bank deal. It's pretty exclusive, but I could propose you. You'd earn 22.5% on your capital. You'd double your income, Pauline.
Which bank's that?
It was the Union Bank of Switzerland. You must have heard of it, surely.
He made out he was right in the know at the heart of everything, and he quoted various companies like Warburg's and Swiss Bank and everything else, and name-dropping all the time.
22.5% sounds awfully high.
But any doubts Pauline might have had dissolved when their relationship became intimate for a while.
He promised me that my money would yield this 22.5%, that I'd be able to buy a house, and he would handle the legal part of it. In total, I handed over 30,000 in cash. The idea of handing over money to a sort of more or less of a stranger, although I'd maybe met him 3 or perhaps 4 times before then, it does seem ridiculous now. And I was very stupid and possibly a bit greedy, but I was in exceptional circumstances where I wanted to move in a hurry.
Here's the rest of the money. I managed to get cash after all.
Well done.
Well, here's to our success.
Indeed.
John, do you think we ought to get something in writing? I mean, suppose one of us died. Nobody would know anything about this.
Don't be ridiculous, Pauline. Don't you trust me?
Of course I trust you, John.
I'm doing this for you.
I'm sorry.
But after Pauline handed over the last of the £30,000, John Ryman vanished for 2 weeks. and Pauline began to have serious doubts about his credibility.
Hello, Pauline. How are you?
John, where on earth have you been? I thought you were some sort of con man who'd run off with my money.
Well, thank you very much. It is all right if I go in, I suppose.
He kept on sort of saying, don't you trust me, and all that kind of thing, and I was so intimidated, I was sort of saying yes, and it's like a gambler trying to cut his losses. And if I stop now, I shan't get anything back. Especially if I accuse him of anything, you know, he'll sort of shuffle off in a hurry.
I've been seeing some friends of mine in the city. The market is decidedly shaky, and those shares of yours are going to be worth nothing if we don't get rid of them.
What, all of them?
Well, no, not necessarily, but don't you worry. All you have to do is sign and leave the rest to me. I just sign at the bottom there.
Oh, well, I was scribbling away, and then he was sort of saying, sit up straight and pay attention, all this sort of thing. I just felt like disappearing, walking out, and I just hadn't got the nerve to do it. And I just signed the wretched... I didn't know he was a crook. I mean, I thought... I mean, as I thought he was a financial guru, I thought he knew what he was doing.
Ryman knew what he was doing, all right. He got £50,000 for Pauline's shares, money she'd never see again. But still, he worked to make it all seem credible. He made Pauline a co-director of a limited company and promised her a full-time job as soon as he found premises. But now he was after her last remaining asset.
What's the matter?
I've been beaten up, Pauline, by a couple of men that I owe money to. Now they're threatening legal action.
Have you been to the police?
Oh, no. No, I'll have to pay them. Trouble is, all my money's tied up in Switzerland. I can't get it out quickly.
What are you going to do?
I don't know. But, well, I think the simplest thing to do would be to raise a loan on your house. Oh, don't worry. I'll take care of the payments.
Yes, but...
Look, Pauline, could you get me another drink? I'm still feeling a bit shaken.
I don't know why I did it. I think I was absolutely hypnotized. I think I was sort of naive, and I'd been out of the country a long time, and I thought an Englishman's word is his bond and all that sort of thing, and it's rubbish, of course.
As soon as Pauline had nothing left to give him, Ryman cut her out of his life. She was desperate now and almost destitute, but she persuaded him to meet her.
I'm afraid I'm very busy, Pauline. I haven't got much time.
I deserve more than that, John. You have my money, and I have a right to know what's happened to it. I want to know that it's all right, John. Please.
Well, as he walked away, I just knew he was a sort of bit of scum. Well, just devastated and could kick myself, you know. I mean, I felt such a bloody fool.
When Pauline went to the police, she discovered that Ryman was a former MP, the Labour member for Blythe. What's more, 3 other women claimed he'd swindled them as well. John Ryman was sentenced to 2.5 years, and 10 months later was let out on parole. Pauline has lost everything, her savings and her home.
Well, I'm paying for my folly, aren't I? My future is sort of nil, and I haven't slept well for months and years. And I think of that bloody creep all the I mean, in the middle of the night sometimes I think of that creep. I just detest him.
If anyone asks Pauline now, don't you trust me? She has the courage to say no. Imagine living in a country where if someone accuses you of breaking the law, you're not allowed to speak on oath in your own defense. Now imagine you've been accused of murder. You could be hanged, and you're not allowed into the witness box. It may seem crazy, but it happened here in Britain till 100 years ago. It was thought that if defendants were allowed to speak in court, innocent ones might incriminate themselves, and guilty people would be tempted into perjury. One case, more than any other, helped to change the law.
Lawrence Maybrick, I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of your late husband, James Maybrick, by poisoning on the 11th of May, 1889. Anything you say may be taken down and used as evidence against you.
I have no friends. They don't accept me because I'm a foreigner. I'm not even mistress in my own house. But I swear before God, Sir Charles, I'm innocent.
I know. The prosecution have a strong case. They've set the whole household against you.
The case against Florence Maybrick was that she'd poisoned her husband over several weeks with arsenic that she'd got from flypapers.
Miss Yap, tell the court what you saw in your mistress's bedroom.
I saw some flypapers soaking in a bowl of water.
Does the household have a problem with flies?
No, sir.
So the household doesn't use flypaper?
No, sir.
Thank you, Miss Yap.
The prosecution argued that Florence administered the poison while nursing her husband, who was already very ill.
We were all suspicious of her, all Mr. Maybrick's friends. On the morning of his death, his brother sent for me. We searched the house from top to bottom.
And what did you find, Mrs. Briggs?
An empty dish that had contained meat broth, hidden in a hat box. They were in Mrs. Maybrick's room.
I would like to remind the jury that this dish of meat broth, when analyzed, was found to contain traces of arsenic.
Oh, for heaven's sakes! James has been taking arsenic for years. It was for his indigestion.
Yes, it's common practice these days.
Well, there were medicine bottles all over the house. They're making me sound so terrible. And I've been so foolish, Sir Charles.
Dearest, since my return I have been nursing James day and night. He is sick unto death and we are terribly anxious. My darling, relieve your mind of all fear of discovery. He has been delirious since Sunday and is perfectly ignorant of everything.
Why did you open that letter?
It fell in the dirt, sir.
Why did you open that letter?
To put it in a clean envelope.
Did it ever occur to you that you could put the letter unopened into a clean envelope?
Perhaps I did wrong in reading it. But the loving words caught my eye, and I couldn't help it.
And what did you do with the letter?
I gave the letter to Mr. Maybrick's brother.
I won't let you nurse my brother any more, Florence. From now on, I'm taking charge of the household. Your conduct is beyond belief.
Members of the jury, you will note that at the very time her husband was, in her own words, sick unto death, this cunning and adulterous woman was writing to, and perhaps even preparing to join, her lover.
I only did it because I was lonely. I craved affection. James had mistresses throughout our marriage.
I'm afraid his infidelities won't make such an impression on the jury.
Oh, you mustn't mention it. I don't want the children to know.
This is ridiculous. We've hardly any witnesses, and you're not allowed to give evidence. We've got to let the jury hear your side of the story. Look, Florence, I am going to ask the judge to allow you to make a statement. You will be pleading for your life. Do you think you can do it?
I don't know.
Just tell the truth. Tell them everything you've told me. If I believe you, they cannot fail to.
Statements by a defendant were rarely used in major criminal proceedings. Claims which couldn't be challenged were thought to have so little credibility they could never really be convincing, and could even help the prosecution. Florence was taking an enormous risk.
My lord, I wish to make a statement in connection with the dreadfully crushing charges that have been made against me. Namely, the willful and deliberate poisoning of my husband, the father of my children. On the day of his death,
I made a full confession to my husband about my affair and received his entire forgiveness for the fearful wrong I had done him. In reference to the use of the flour papers, for many years I have used a face wash prescribed to me. It consists of arsenic, benzoin, elderflower and water. I soak the flour papers to obtain the arsenic for the face wash. I now wish to refer to the arsenic in the meat broth dish. On the 9th of May, the nurse gave my husband some meat broth. I sat beside him and he told me that he was very sick. My lord, I had not one true or honest friend in that house. I had no one to consult, no one to advise me. James implored me to give him some powder. He said it would not harm him and I could put it in his food. I then consented.
Florence was so frank, so unguarded, so innocent, she did more harm than good. Even though it was shown that her husband never drank the meat broth, all this talk of arsenic and of an affair, both now freely admitted, were damaging to her defence.
Do you find the prisoner guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
This court doth ordain you shall be taken hence to the place from whence you came, and from thence to the place of execution, and that there you shall be hanged by the neck until you are dead. May the Lord have mercy on your soul.
It was never really clear that Florence did murder her husband, and following a public outcry, her sentence was commuted to imprisonment for life. Her barrister, Sir Charles Russell, campaigned tirelessly for her release and for changes in the law. He was certain, as were many others, that if she could have testified on oath, the truth of what she had to say would have stood up to prosecution cross-examination. 9 years later, in 1898, after a long crusade, the Criminal Evidence Act allowed anyone accused to give evidence in their own defence. Charles Russell became Lord Chief Justice. Florence Maybrick stayed in jail for 14 years. Crime is often dramatic, but what gets left out of most detective stories is that it's almost always desperately sad. Obviously, the heart aches greatest when children are involved, and you might imagine that as a society we have proper means to care for children who get caught up in desperate events. But we don't. Not consistently, at any rate. Not even when the need is plainly at its greatest, which is when a child's bereaved through murder. Now, for children watching the film that follows, let me point out that grown-ups frequently squabble, just as children do. But very, very rarely does it end up as these sad stories do.
The child sees one beloved parent hurting the other beloved parent, and they're standing by and they can't do anything to stop it happening. They feel tremendously powerless, helpless, and very guilty afterwards that they didn't stop it.
We all know!
Blacking out the brutal images is the only way most young children can cope when one parent kills the other.
The whole process of mourning involves summoning up images of the dead person and being able to say goodbye to them in your mind. But if the image that you summon up is a mutilated image, or one covered in blood, or some other horrific image, then the horror of the image prevents you from recollecting in the tranquility that you need in order to be able to grieve. So, has anything horrible ever happened to you?
Yes.
Do you think you could show me?
Yes.
Children often play out what they've experienced. They may not have the language to be able to describe what they saw, but they can actually show you what they saw.
This boy is acting out a sequence Dora Black has often seen for real.
Mummy.
We use all sorts of ways of trying to help children. Young children, we use drawings, we use doll play, modelling, plasticine, to get the horrific images out of their brain and out there into reality. I've been very struck by how photographic children's memories are. They remember every little detail of the scene. I saw a little boy whose father killed his mother by shooting her with a shotgun. And when I saw him a few days later, he decided he wanted to draw a picture of what happened. And I said, "You haven't drawn your mother." And he said, "Are you sure you want me to? I can only draw sad faces." And then he drew the picture of his mother with this very sad face. And he drew the picture of his father with this huge gun, which was much bigger than his father. And he drew a picture of his father's car crashing into a tree, because his father had actually killed himself afterwards.
Carers often think it's best not to talk about the tragic things that happened. But repressing dreadful memories is often the worst thing.
Nightmares are very common. They are very frightening. And you have to remember that these children have not got a parent to comfort them. Their mother is dead, their father's in prison or dead by his own hand. They're not always living with people who they know well.
And children rarely volunteer to tell what happened. Yet sometimes, through compulsive play, they draw attention to something they're desperate to discuss.
I knew that she hadn't witnessed the killing, and it was only many months later that we realised that her father had, after killing his wife, had tried to kill himself by cutting his wrists in the bath, and that this little girl had come in on him. And then when I could make sense of it and help her to understand that Daddy had thought maybe he should die too, she stopped this compulsive play. I saw my first patient over 13 years ago now, a little girl of 5, named Esther, whose father had killed her mother. We know now that she did witness it, but we didn't have the techniques at that time to actually find out, and she hadn't got the language to tell us. What does dead mean?
That you never see somebody again. Mummy had the worstest. Daddy's in hospital. They were both in hospital. Mummy died in hospital. But I don't think that's very true.
So Esther, you worry a lot about people perhaps not telling you the truth and not telling you if your daddy goes back home, don't you?
Esther went to live with relatives while her father was in prison.
Nobody really spoke about my mum at all, ever. Ever, really, no one did. Well, I guess I was the only one that would persist in asking so-called rude questions, you know, things that I wasn't meant to ask. But what's going on, you know, where's Mummy? I want Mummy and Daddy to come back home. You know, what happened to Mummy? Why is Daddy in prison? You know, whereas everyone else, all right, they were older and they understood, but they never thought to actually explain to me what had happened.
Her father was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years.
It was really horrible visiting my dad in prison because Dad really was my ultimate hero. I was always a special daughter, and every time I saw him in that setting, it brought it back to me that I was there because of a foul thing.
Thanks, Daddy.
Give me a hand.
My real feeling was, you know, my dad's this special, but he's in prison, you know, and I want to be with my dad. I don't want to be with my aunt, you know. It was really, really difficult.
After 2 years, prison visits ended.
Oh, I was so happy when my dad came out of prison. Really, really overjoyed. Daddy! Like, it was the best thing ever.
Oh, baby!
When her father came out of prison, Esther returned to his care, and I wasn't allowed to see her anymore. And I didn't see her for 10 years or so.
In fact, Esther still didn't really understand what had happened to her mother. She still repressed what she herself had seen.
What you looking at?
Pictures?
I don't want you ever looking at those again. Do you understand? Never!
And I just thought, I mean, all right, he didn't want to talk to me about my mum and he didn't want me to ask questions. But to actually prevent me from dealing with my loss by maybe sitting down with some photos, it's sick, you know, it is really sick.
Okay.
Esther was still confused about her mother's killing, till as a teenager, when her father had remarried, the memories came flooding back.
Children sometimes develop flashbacks. That is, an experience of being back in that room when that thing happened.
I just sort of stood there and I suddenly realised that I'd actually seen exactly the same thing when I was 5. I just said, don't do that, you know, I saw that with my mum, I don't want to see this happen. I'd seen my mum pounding my dad's chest on the night she died. Once I realised that he had killed my mum, I was filled with real hate. I just wanted to get away from him and never, ever, ever to see him again. That split second I made the decision to leave home. That second I knew that I actually couldn't love him anymore. I hate the authorities for doing that because my dad never cared about what I felt. My family didn't. But, you know, they only looked at it as, well, he's not going to kill his kids, but they didn't think, you know, well, how about living with the murderer of your mother?
When Esther came back to see me after all those years, she was very confused about what had happened when she was 5. And because I knew her all those years ago, I was able to help her to understand what had happened and confirm the evidence of her own eyes that she remembered, but wasn't sure whether it was a dream or reality.
I think now at this age, if I hadn't seen Dr. Black, I'd be completely lost. She is really probably the only woman I trust. She's the only woman who hasn't let me down. I'm just very angry and I'm very sad, you know, very, very sad. And I just want to be a little girl again. I want my mummy and I want my daddy and I want to play on swings.
If you need help or counselling as a child, try calling Childline. The number's 0800 1111. That's 0800 1111. It's free, it's 24 hours a day. We'll be back a week from now with more on crime and the people who've been caught up in it.